I think there are three ways to conceive what happened on October 7th. There are three aspects to it. Number one is the factual one. And there we know quite a lot at this point, but certainly we don't have an exhaustive understanding of what happened on that day. Then there is, excuse me, then there is the legal aspect. And the legal aspect will be left to lawyers, what kinds of crimes were committed and what levels or degrees of culpability there are. But then there's a third aspect, because law often lags behind morality. And then there is that third aspect of morality. And the moral judgment is, of course, the one that's is haziest and most elusive. And when you're presented with a situation like what happened on October 2nd, it seems to me that the best thing you can do under the situation is look for analogies, more or less close analogies, no analogy being perfect. So my own view, for what it's worth, we start with the basic facts. Gaza is not a foreign entity. Gaza is not a foreign state. It is untrue that the state of Israel is under attack by a foreign entity or a foreign state. Gaza is a part of the state of Israel. There is one state from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, and Gaza is part of that state. So we can set aside the various claims that are made about a quote unquote state of war, to the extent that state of war means two separate entities or two separate states. I think the closest analogy, it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good, is to describe what happened in Gaza as a slave revolt. I won't go into the conditions of the people. I won't go into the conditions inside Gaza. Everybody here is more or less familiar with them. Obviously, the analogy is not perfect because Gazans were actually less than slaves, since they weren't put in a state of servitude in order to supply labor. They were basically left in Gaza they were consigned and confined to Gaza in order to languish and die. But I still believe the analogy holds up on many grounds. And then the question is, what can we learn from the history of slave revolts? Because what happened in Gaza was on October 7th was effectively a slave revolt. As for myself, I went back and looked at the largest slave revolt in the United States, and that was the one led by Nat Turner, the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831. And if you look at the Nat Turner Rebellion, there are actually quite close analogies to what happened in Gaza. Nat Turner was apparently a quite intelligent person. He also was what you might call a religious zealot. Less flatteringly, he would be called a religious fanatic. He was convinced that he was an instrument of God, that God had called upon him to lead the slave revolt, and that all of his actions were sanctioned by God. Now, the actual revolt by Nat Turner, according to a very good historian, he said that Nat Turner's instructions to the other rebels was, quote, kill all whites. And that's what the rebels proceeded to do. By the end of their rebellion, they had killed roughly 60 whites, men, women, and children. Before I proceed, I would just want to make the side comment that the Nat Turner rebellion is now occupies an honored place in American history. Now, it's possible that not everybody's familiar with the details of what that rebellion looked like, but as a factual matter, notwithstanding Nat Turner's standing order to kill all whites, it occupies an honored place in American history. For me, the interesting question is not just the rebellion itself, but the judgment, the moral judgment cast by the most exemplary figures in American life at the time. They were called the abolitionists. And they also occupy a very honored place in American history. People like Charles Sumner, Wendell Phillips, William Lloyd Garrison, and others. So I went back and looked at what did Garrison have to say about the Nat Turner revolt. And it's a very interesting fact. I hope some of you will have a chance to look at it. I posted parts of it, a large part of it, on my website, on my Substack. On William Lloyd Garrison, one of the leading abolitionists, he had a newspaper called The Liberator, and The Liberator was devoted to fighting the cause of immediate emancipation of the slaves. I don't have time now to quote from that document, but I'm going to just give you the bottom line. He starts out the document by saying, "We told you so. We warned you and warned you and warned you," speaking to whites now. "We warned you and warned you and warned you. If you keep these people in this condition, if you perpetuate this condition, this is going to happen." Number two, he castigated, he attacked the white hypocrites who spoke so eloquently about the liberation struggles of the French during the French Revolution, of the Greeks, of the Poles, how they upheld the principles of liberty and all such things, but they never applied it to Black people. And he called them all a band of hypocrites, and he ridiculed all of their protestations of enlightenment. He then went on to say that what the rebels did, he said it could not be justified. He did say that. He went on to say that what happened in the rebellion was shocking. But the most revealing thing about what he said was what he didn't say. You can read every word of William Lloyd Garrison's account of the Nat Turner Rebellion. I would add it took a huge amount of courage, physical, raw courage. William Lloyd Garrison did not condemn the rebellion. He didn't approve it, but he did not disapprove it. He did not condemn it, but he did not condone it. He was what you might call, I think the proper term is, he was morally neutral on the subject. And in my view, obviously reasonable people can disagree. In my view, his refusal, notwithstanding a lot of pressure, he was told, don't go south because you're not going to come back. Notwithstanding a lot of pressure, he stood firm because he understood, here I'm interpreting for him, he understood the condition of the slave. And he said at one point, you don't have, because the abolitionists were being blamed for the slave rebellion. And he said, the Nat Turner Rebellion. And he said, they don't need us to have an incentive to go on a murderous rampage. He said, their lacerations, their humiliations, the physical assaults on them, the moral assaults on them, and he goes through the whole list of the way the slaves are treated. He said, without us, they would have harbored the same rage and fury as if we didn't exist. And I think it was his daily confrontation with the reality of the life of the slave that forced him, compelled him, morally compelled him to not condemn them. And in my view, honest people can disagree, fair-minded people can disagree. I believe on the moral question, we should get inspiration from the attitude of the most revered figures of the pre-Civil War period, namely the white abolitionists, and to point the finger at those who drove these people mad. The condition that they were forced upon them, that condition drove them mad. And I feel the same verdict applies to what happened in Israel on October 7th.